Wow, nice turnout considering the weather. Impressive. Y'all are strong people, aren't you? Last week, this week, all right, looking good, looking good. So, redo the series. I need a redo. I'll tell you a little bit about it here in just a moment, but let me tell you about this email I got several years ago. So I was working at a church, get this email. I didn't know the email was there. I'd preached Sunday morning. Sunday after church, did what a lot of you do. We go out to eat. We go smash some Mexican. We're coming back, pulling into the driveway, and I get a text from the executive pastor. His name's Steve. So I get this text, and Steve says, "Hey, did you read the email?" I'm like, and there was like this emphasis upon the email, like everybody knew about it. This was the email coming. I was like, no, I haven't seen it yet. What's up? And he said this. He said, well, just wait. Take your Sunday, enjoy, and we'll talk about it Monday morning. I mean, who does that? What are you talking about? You're going to leave me hanging like that for the next 16 hours? So I'm like, are you serious? And it's like, yeah, we'll touch base tomorrow morning. We'll work through it. And I'm like, oh gosh, all right. So I do one of those brief prayers. David, I'm like, God, give me some control, peace of mind, help me get through the rest of the day and whatever. So he follows through with that. We go on with the evening, have some family time, and go in the next morning. I'm like, Steve, what's up? And then Steve shows me this email, and I'm reading through it, and it's about me. And it's about an entire page long. And I'm reading through this bad boy, and I have to tell you, I got a little bit of thick skin and, 20 years in ministry, some thick skin. But I'm reading through this email, and I'm like, wow, that dinged me. And it was just short of murder. Just short. I mean, this guy went all in with the criticism. And I'm reading through this thinking, wow, like, am I really the problem, or does this dude have a problem? I can't believe that. So Steve's like, yeah, that's why I wanted you to take the evening, enjoy your family, come back and whatever. So I'm reading through it. He forwards it to me. I go back to my office and I read it a couple of times, and I'm like, And I'm sorting through it, and it is just, gosh, it's intense and critical. And I kid you not, just short of violence and threatening. Just short of that. So I read through it again, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do what any normal person would do with this. So I print it out, and I frame it, and I still have it to this day. The following week, I'm going to be teaching, so the following week, I come back, and I've been praying this up for the past 7 days. I come back, it just fits with the series we're in, so I bring it up on stage, and I just put it right here beside of me. And we work through the series. And I invite dialogue. And it's dialogue that never comes. So over the past several years, I'll get that email out and I'll read through it. And I'll just reflect on it. And I'll sort through it. And I'll pray about this stuff because it was intense criticism. And for me, the question is always, as a leader, the question is, what do I really do with criticism? With communication that comes my way that's challenging or crippling or threatening, what do you really do with that? And that's where we step into the story of Nehemiah, and where some of us may need a redo. Maybe some criticism came your way and you handled it very inappropriately, and you'd love a redo. Or as I'm talking, you realize that you weren't the recipient of criticism, you're actually the giver. And you'd give anything for a redo because you realize how this really dinged the other person. So we step into the story of Nehemiah, and there's several people involved in this story, but I'm going to reduce it to one particular guy named Sanballat. I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. One, as we read through it, and you can read it in the text yourself, but as we read through it, you'll see that there's these wild names, and they're from these wild places, and it just gets really challenging to put all that up on the screen, okay? So I'm not taking away scripture, I'm taking away names. So this guy pops up, and as the story of Nehemiah goes on, it's this guy named Sanballat that continues to put pressure on Nehemiah. And he starts bringing intense, threatening criticism to this guy, Nehemiah. So the text starts out, and this guy, he gets word, and I love how the text says it, and it says it multiple times throughout the story, when Sanballat, when he heard. And I bet that clicks with some of you right now. When he heard that Nehemiah had come to Jerusalem for the benefit of the Jewish people. When he heard that that was happening, what happened? He's disturbed. And when you read that story, it amazes me simply because Nehemiah comes to the benefit of this group of people, it disturbs Sanballat. And I'm wondering if I disturbed my friend several years ago. So the text goes on, you keep reading, and again, when he heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry. And notice that language. He was greatly incensed. So Nehemiah coming to do this good work, and it's not just good work. It's not just humanitarian aid. This is God's setup. God is involved in this. God is involved in this drive, in this direction in Nehemiah's life. And he's got some outside sources hearing about what's going on. And it's messing with them. They're fuming about it. So Sanballat does what a lot of us just naturally do or naturally want to do. In the presence of his associates, notice that line, in the presence of his associates, he said. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that he heard, and that it's in the presence of his associates, he said, I see a guy who's like, I don't like what's happening over here. So I'm going to start talking about it in a group of people who think just like me and who will support my being disturbed and who will support me being angry and who will support me being greatly incensed. Even though those aren't good characteristics, especially in this story. He's going to be challenging God, not just Nehemiah. So those aren't good characteristics, but he's going to start talking about it in a group of people that will add fuel to that fire. Now, when I read this story, it's a clear distinction, and I really want you to get this. It's a clear distinction between two things. One, people who are reactive and people who are responsive. And I really want you to take this away. There's a big difference between reacting and responding. And Nehemiah is going to put on a master class for you and I in how to respond instead of react. So reactive people, and you've heard me say this before. So when I came in this morning, I heard that there was an auction going on for this right here. Anybody want in on it? Dave Lowry said the betting started at -$5. So, all right. You've heard me say before, reaction, somebody who's reactive, something happens. There's some kind of stimulus. Somebody's coming in to benefit the Jews. Somebody's coming in to rebuild the wall. And you're disturbed, you're angry, you're incensed. Something happens and you're just off to the races. You react simply because this occurred. So reactive people, here's some of the characteristics of reactive people. They blame often. There's a lot of blame in their language. And when you listen to them, there's always blaming someone for something that's going on. And there's very harsh criticism. Like Sanballat's not just bothered, like he wants to go a different direction. He's incensed. The criticism is harsh. And reactive people, they're easily offended. And they focus a lot more on other people instead of themselves. They're always worried about how other people are behaving or how they are growing instead of how they are behaving and how they're growing. And when you put all that together, reactive people want instant solutions. And the instant solution is to stop the rebuilding of the wall, to get Nehemiah out of this position, to get him back out of Jerusalem. So reactive people are dangerous. And here's what Nehemiah knows. Nehemiah knows that a reactive presence can spread through a community so quickly and just burn the thing down. But responsive people, they can have the exact same stimulus. The same thing occurs, but responsive people have this ability to take a time out. And it's here where they act on principle. There's something more important. There's something that's driving their behavior, and it's not the stimulus. It's not the perceived problem or the perceived threat. There's something more intuitive with God's nature and God's design and his value system. And that's where Nehemiah acts. He acts on principle. So that when he gets here, same spot, it's not a reaction. It's a thought out response. It's intentional. So when I read through this story, I see Nehemiah doing this. And what I see Nehemiah doing is getting really clear in his own head, in his own mind, in his own heart, when criticism comes his way. So I thought we'd spend just a few minutes, because if you're anything like me, you're human. Humans? All right. So you're going to experience criticism, whether it's in your family, your circle of friends, your job in the community, based on some of your beliefs, your political affiliation, whatever. Criticism is going to come your way. And sometimes it's very intense. It's sharp, it hurts, it dings. So the question is, what do you do with it? And Nehemiah, I'm telling you, masterclass on how to respond to criticism. Not react, but respond to criticism. So in order to get clear in your heart and mind about the criticism coming your way and how to deal with it, first thing you got to do is consider your source. So when I got this email, read through it, called a buddy of mine, and this particular friend was a very intentional friend that I called and said, hey, I want to forward you this email, read through it, let me know what you think. So he read through the email. I never have to question where this guy is in our friendship. He speaks truth and love to me, so I know I could really count on his response. So he reads through it, and he said, I did a little research. He called me later. He's like, did a little research on the particular guy that sent this your way, and he was like, yeah, you just need to trash it. Let this go. It's not worth your time. So I read through it again, and I started picking up on statements and sentences this guy was saying. I was like, that's true. When I think about who this guy is, when I consider the source of this criticism, this probably isn't worth my time. Still going to keep it framed though, okay? So, Sanballat. Sanballat, the word actually, this guy's name, and can you imagine this? This guy's name is attached to a word that literally means sin has given life. Can you imagine? Nehemiah is probably aware of this, walking around, the language, the association of languages, the slang, how people talk, the vernacular, the local language. So Nehemiah is probably aware of this, but the dude's name means sin has given life. Can you imagine walking around and everybody looking at you knows that that's what your name means? So it's probably a lot of people know that this guy brings this kind of baggage, and I bet you're aware of that too. And this is why it's so important for Nehemiah. The criticism coming your way, everybody knows that person communicates like that. Everybody sees it. So when it comes your way, it's nothing new, and it's not about you, it's about that person. And that's the first step to getting past criticism, or how to deal with it, or getting clear when criticism comes your way. Consider the source. So I took my friend's advice and I just let it go, and I went on with my responsibilities. Now, the second thing of getting clear in your mind when criticism comes your way is listen carefully. And that's why before I put the email away where I keep it stored at my house in my gun safe. That's where it is, okay? So if I ever need a quick, form of protection, or I need to read that email. Where is it? I know where it's at. It's in my gun safe. So listen carefully. Listen carefully. So I reread this several times, and I kid you not, I read it and I would ask myself, is there truth in this? Is this accurate? What is he saying? What's his problem? Should I pay attention to this? What's his thesis statement? Make sense? So, Christian's been struggling with some health issues and all this. We had this little thing go on with a meeting with a cardiologist this past Monday, and it was really indicative to me about how you need to listen really carefully and listen closely for what's being said, and so you know how to respond. And that's the deal with listening carefully. It's not just about is there any truth in it? It's about, if you listen carefully, you can really understand the communication that's coming your way. And that sets you up for success and how you're going to not react, but respond to this. So we meet with this cardiologist, and the cardiologist comes in. It's me, Michelle, Christian. This guy comes in, and we like this doctor. He's a really good guy. So he comes in and sits down, good bedside manner. We're working through some stuff, and he says, Christian, you meet the criteria for POTS. And that's an acronym for something really long that I can't pronounce. So if you're interested and you want to pray specifically about that, you go Google it, okay? POTS. But he says, you meet the criteria for POTS. I'm like, okay, all right. And then that's about it. About 5 minutes later, we're in the car. So Christian, Michelle, and I were driving out of the parking lot, and I'm like, okay, so when are we going to get the formal diagnosis that Christian has POTS? And Christian and Michelle both said, well, that was the diagnosis. And I said, wait a minute. He didn't say Christian has POTS. He said, Christian, you meet the criteria for POTS. And the way David Green thinks, Christian, you have POTS. Christian, you meet the criteria for POTS. Those are light years apart for me. So I'm trying to listen to this. And Michelle and Christian are like, no, that is the diagnosis, because in meeting the criteria, we've ruled a bunch of other stuff out, so it's leaning toward this. So they think that is the diagnosis. I don't. I was listening intently to this doctor. What is he saying? And I walked away thinking, okay, when's this going to happen? That's why you listen carefully to the communication coming your way, so that you can assess what is being said to you, what is not being said to you, so that you know how to respond. So when all this starts shaking out and Sanballat starts bringing this criticism to Nehemiah, Nehemiah's listening. He's working with this communication. He's embracing the criticism. He's framed it. And he's rereading it. He's reading through it. And then he realizes, oh, this is Sanballat's deal. And Sanballat looks at Nehemiah and he says, hey, are you trying to become king? Are you trying to replace the king here in Jerusalem? And that's it. Oh, here's where that's coming. And you read this story and you realize that this tension between Nehemiah and Sanballat that Sanballat's bringing, it's not really religious. It's political. Sanballat had some authority. He had some pull. And Nehemiah was a perceived threat to Sanballat's position. So Sanballat's like, I'll communicate with this guy in a way that challenges him and puts him in competition with the king. Nobody wants to be in that position. But Sanballat isn't aware that Nehemiah a short time ago stood in front of the king and said, hey, here's what I want to do. Can you resource it? And the king went all in. So that's why it's important to listen carefully, so that it sets you up for success in how you respond to the communication coming your way. Good? Good so far? All right, so the next one is you need to expect conflict. I mean, sometimes this will be applicable, sometimes not, but go ahead and expect some degree of conflict. It can be verbal, and it can be very intense, if you will, and sometimes it can escalate into an argument or whatever, something that you walk away from, and a few minutes later, a few hours later, a few days later, you're like, I wish that hadn't happened. But expect conflict. If it doesn't come, fantastic. But expect conflict. So as this story keeps going, you read, and it's really interesting. Sanballat brings all these other guys with these crazy names, and they come for the specific purpose, the text tells us, to stir up trouble. That's their goal. They're coming to stir up trouble for Nehemiah and this mission he has to rebuild the wall. That's their angle. So Nehemiah's objective, his mission, is to rebuild the wall. Sanballat's mission is to stir up trouble. Expect conflict, especially if the communication coming your way is from someone, hear what I'm saying here, is from someone who is not where you are. Maybe you're well ahead of them when it comes to your walk with Jesus. Maybe you're well ahead of them when it comes to how healthy your family is. Maybe you're well ahead of them in your career, or the way you take control and manage your life. You're well ahead of them. In the conflict, that's where it can have a rub. They see that and they're just stirring up trouble for you. This is a big deal. Several years ago, different guy, asks to meet me in my office before Wednesday night Bible study. I'm like, well, sure, yeah, that'll be a great time for us. We can work out some stuff and then move forward. I didn't know the guy had a problem. So he comes up, we meet in my office, I'm sitting there, it's kind of weather like this, so I'm sitting there in my hoodie and I've just got my arms in my hoodie like this. So the guy's sitting across from the table and we start talking. It's going great. And then he says, well, you said something Sunday. And what I said was about a belief that this particular church has. And I embrace the belief. And it's a belief that bounces around here at Madison Hills too. It's one of our beliefs that we have. So it's nothing kooky or wonky or anything like that. It's nothing out of the blue or anything. It's just a common belief that a lot of followers of Jesus
have? And he said, you said in your sermon, and I knew that was going to be a problem when he set that up. You said in your sermon, and as the story unfolded, I'm glad it went the way that it did. He was very bothered by what I had said. He said, you said in your sermon, and then he tried to quote me, but it was more like a paraphrase. Well, he misquoted. Not that he got it wrong. He just didn't take it far enough. I said a lot more than he was paraphrasing. So when he said, you said, I interrupted him and said, just for clarity, I want you to know that I was saying this. And he stopped it. He said, nope, I knew not to meet here, slams his hands on the desk, stands up. I knew not to meet with you like this because now it's going to be a I said, you said kind of thing. And then he just storms out. And I'm thinking, I'm glad he left. If I was able to tell him what I really had said, then man, he would have really went off. I mean, that would have really messed with the guy. But you expect conflict. Stuff like that is going to happen. It's just human nature. The part that is the problem for me as a pastor, and I know it's a problem for a lot of you who follow Jesus, and your walk with Christ is the most important thing in your world. I know this bothers you too. It's so unfortunate that we don't just see that in the world. We experience that in the church. I hate that. That bothers me so badly that we have that kind of tension in churches. Does that bother you? It's so unfortunate, and we want to make sure that's part of our discipleship process, that as we're helping people understand what it means to walk with Christ, that you're understanding, I'm no longer to be a reactive person. Walking with Jesus means I become responsive. I take the time out. I pause. I pump the brakes. I consider everything that's happening. Consider the source. I listen carefully. I expect there's going to be conflict, but I'm going to sort through this. I'm not going to blame or criticize or take offense easily. And I'm not just going to focus on the other person. I'm not going to look for a quick fix here. I'm going to sort this out the way it needs to be sorted out. And that's one of the reasons we teach this. But getting clear also, well, let me say this too. This is one of my favorite verses. I was going to skip this, but let me go ahead and say it. I feel that the mood's right. This is one of my favorite verses. And I think historically, over the past 20 years in ministry, the thing that gets me in the most trouble is disengaging in conversations. It's not beliefs or stances or things that I say or whatever. It's not engaging. So if you're a person who doesn't like to engage tense or critical conversations, I want you to know that's okay. If you don't like to get involved in conversations that you know are going to lead nowhere, you don't have to get involved in those conversations. If you don't want to be involved in some form of communication that's just going to create conflict that could be avoided, you know that's okay. And you have biblical permission to disengage from those types of conversation. So 2 Timothy 2, notice this verse, let me say it again. So he's already said this once. He says, let me say it again. Don't have anything to do with foolish talk or conversations that only create trouble or tension or don't go anywhere. They just cause trouble. So people who want to communicate that way don't have anything to do with it. You don't have to engage. You can disengage that type of dialogue. And I want to emphasize, let me say it again. Disengage. Some of your Bibles will say, don't have anything to do with foolish talk or stupid conversations that go nowhere. So if you find yourself in a situation and the conversation's unfolding and you realize that this is going nowhere, I want you to know that that could be, if you're a follower of Jesus, that could be the Holy Spirit tapping you on the shoulder saying, you don't have to follow the lead of this conversation. You don't have to go nowhere with this individual. You can disengage. So, next thing to getting clear in your heart and mind, consider the source, listen carefully, expect conflict, but accept any truth. And this is another reason I reread the email. I wanted to know, does this guy have a point? He's throwing shots, he's throwing punches, and they're hitting. I mean, he's landing them. Jab, jab, boom, jab, jab, boom. He's got me. But I want to know, is any of this true? Is it accurate? Can I learn from this? Does he have a valid point? All this other stuff is just nonsense, but at this point right here, do I need to pay attention and adjust or develop or mature or implement that? Listen and accept any truth. So here's the redo I need. And I don't know how I want you to take this, okay? I'm thinking that we could spin it. And I'm not really big on spin, and I don't like manipulation. But I do like the way this sounds when we present it a certain way. So if I can rewind and take you back to last week, I put some numbers up on the screen. And one of the numbers I put on the screen was about debt and dissolving debt. And one of those was around $5,000 a month and then $2 million in debt. You remember that? I need a redo. So I noticed that a couple of our guys who are fully aware of the budget that we've put together, they weren't squirming, but they were looking like, they're a little confused. After service, I get a couple of texts, I have a conversation or two, and I had missed the numbers. The information that I had, I was looking at two numbers and adding them incorrectly. So the number is not 2 million. It is only 900,000. So I need a redo, okay? It's only 900,000. So if you've written the check for 2 million, keep that rolling, okay? Keep that rolling. But I like the way it sounds. In only one short week, Madison Hills, we've dissolved the budget by $1.1 million. Keep it rolling. Don't you like the way that sounds? So let's work with that, right? Yeah, okay. So when these guys are talking, they were so gracious about, that mistake and everything. And it turned into just a big joke, and I told them I'd make it right this morning. But in those conversations, I'm listening to that. I'm like, I can't believe I made that mistake, live and everything. But I had to accept that reality. And I've told you before that one of the most important things, and Nehemiah does this so well, I think this is one of the primary responsibilities, if not the primary responsibility of any leader, and that's to define reality. What is true? What is real? What is really going on? Reactive people can't do that. Responsive people do it all the time. And that's what Nehemiah does. He accepts any truth, adjusts, adapts, and then he moves forward. So, last part to getting clear when criticism comes your way, consider the source, listen carefully, expect conflict, accept any truth, and then you're set up to respond well. So all this stuff going on in Nehemiah's life, and the text tells us as this story unfolds, that this communication comes Nehemiah's way. And it's not one email. Actually, when you read the text, Sanballat reaches out to Nehemiah and says, hey, you know what, let's just put all this aside. Let's go get coffee. Meet me at one of the local villages, and that's my move. That's what I say to you all. Hey, let's get coffee. Sit across the table and talk about life. So let's go to one of the villages and meet. And Nehemiah sends a response back, and he was like, "Nah, don't worry about it. We'll just move forward to the whole thing." Well, Sanballat doesn't like that, so he sends them the same message multiple times, and you can read it in the text. It's set apart in your Bible, and he starts challenging Nehemiah in his purpose for being in Jerusalem, and really starting to throw punches like my friend did several years ago. And Nehemiah just ignores it. He just ignores it, and he basically tells Sanballat, "You're just making all this stuff up in your mind. It's not even real." And then the text tells us Nehemiah gets these messages coming his way. This criticism's continuous. These challenges are continuous. And the text tells us, but Nehemiah, he prayed. And that's what he did. Everything coming his way. And his response, he prayed. He didn't react. There was no, "Oh, you say that? Well, what about this?" He didn't take offense. He wasn't knocked off balance. He actually kept his composure. And maybe was fully aware, like you and I are, that if I don't do something, this is going to get out of hand and turn into something that nobody really wants. So deep breath. and let me pray about this. Isn't that beautiful? You know, with that communication, I think it's so important. And I love that Nehemiah prayed, and the text doesn't tell us what he said explicitly to Sanballat with this. The text doesn't tell us explicitly what he said to the people that he's leading. The text just tells us that he prayed, as if there's some kind of innate power to influence us in tense, difficult times. And I don't know about you, but it's easy for prayer to escape David Green when things are cool. When the challenges come, then I'm on my knees 100%. But when things are okay, I forget to pray maybe the way, or with the passion, or the intentionality, or the intellect, or the guidance, or the awareness that I should. So the thing about Nehemiah in bringing a responsive disposition to this dynamic is that he brings a non-anxious presence where it creates a mood for people to step up, to get involved, to experience growing pains, and still move forward together. Isn't that a beautiful dynamic? So as we end, I want you to know that there's something driving this for Nehemiah. And this is where I see things popping up in Madison Hills that reflect this story. Nehemiah just doesn't do this because, oh, yeah, he's a good dude. Yeah, he's a hard worker. Or, yeah, he's been in this job for a while, so he knows his way around. It's nothing like that. There's something deeply embedded in this guy that moves him to keep moving forward despite the criticism, despite what comes his way. And the text is kind of in the middle of this whole story. And there's some stuff going on the side, some stuff in the culture, then some stuff in the people he's leading. And he looks at it and he says, no, we're not going to act that way. But the words in the text say, out of reverence for God, that's not what we're going to do. Can't you hear him saying that? And that's what we want our people at Madison Hills and our leaders understanding. Out of reverence for God is why we do or why we don't. Out of reverence for God is why we keep moving the mission forward. So out of reverence for God, we're not going to do that. And he just keeps on with the mission of building this wall. And maybe your reverence for God has gotten lost. And that's the core thing, and you felt that. And you really need a redo with that. Well, I'll be in the back. And if you want to touch base with that, let me know, and we can help you take your next steps moving forward. Sound good? God, we know you love us because of what you're doing in our lives and the life of this church. So we thank you. That's all we want to do right now. We just want to thank you for who you are and what you bring into our lives. You're good, and we know that because of stories like this and your son, Jesus. So we praise you in his name. Amen.